to drive a lot. Various circumstances in my life, a long-distance relationship, a job a little further away, studying in a place far from my hometown, had me regularly sitting in the car for distances of 1 to several hours straight. And I gotta admit that over time I grew to enjoy these long drives quite a bit. Whether roads were free or full of construction sites or traffic jams, I learned to turn these liminal journeys into rejuvenating, almost zen-like experiences. My go-to stimulus would be either listening to music or audiobooks, and sometimes I'd even keep the radio off and let my mind wander aimlessly without any of the manifold distractions we're being bombarded with in our daily lives. For a perpetually racing ADHD brain, this can be quite the cerebral adventure, let me tell you. And over time, I noticed something fascinating. I could drive from A to B for multiple hours, and my mind would become this swirling miasma of tantalizing thoughts and turgid ideas, completely engulfed in thought for the entire trip. And then all of a sudden, I'd be at my destination. I was just there, almost like I teleported. It felt like waking up from a long, restless, and meandering fever dream. Of course, I was awake and attentive throughout the entire drive. I had successfully maneuvered my car along the road, always staying between the guardrails, gracefully evading other cars and obstacles, and probably following at least 80% of the traffic rules. Educated guess. But if I try to recall any actual palpable moments, sounds, places from the commute itself, anything specific?
There is nothing.
Where do all these impressions go? An immeasurable stream of information had rushed past me over hours of continuous sensual exposure, and my brain decided without my knowledge or consent that every single bit of it is collateral, deadweight, declared unfit to be stored within the limited capacity of my long-term memory, and simply flushes it out of my cerebral cortex into the void.
If a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, what color is the tree?
All colors?
Exactly!
What if this uncountable stream of liminal data was actually somehow intercepted, cataloged, and stored by someone, something, some entity? What if I could get a hold of it? If I were granted a fairy wish to change something in the worldwide video game landscape, I would make it so games would overall be shorter,
I'll catch up.
less obsessed with graphical fidelity and technical flexing, and that the people who make them aren't routinely coerced into exploitative hyper-competitive crunch labor.
You crazy?
There definitely is a place for long games, but more often than not, excessive playtime is achieved by padding games out with hours upon hours of mediocre to uninspired assembly line filler content. I've always loved games that get their message across with as much respect to the player's time as possible, utilizing the space they're taking up to maximum efficiency. Games where every moment has something to say.
It says what it wants to say, and then it ends.
Paratopic is a prime example for a game whose short playtime is almost ridiculously densely packed. My first playthrough took me maybe an hour to get through. This was an hour spent mostly wondering what is even going on and what the hell I'm actually doing, or even who I am to begin with. It left me confused, bewildered, and frankly even a bit irritated. Like many people I spoke to that had played it, I initially put it out of sight, out of mind. At first. But there was something about Paratopic that kept silently gnawing at my grey cells like an incessant colony of termites. Like an intrusive thought I can't shake. I kept thinking about it again and again, and always in very different contexts. This video is not so much meant to be a review of Paratopic, but more of an exploration of its themes and pondering about its meta-narrative and everything else that I just need to get out somehow. Now this is the unavoidable moment where I would tell you that this video will contain spoilers for Paratopic, although this game is a bit of a special case. You don't need to have played it to understand this video. I'm providing all the context you need to understand the points I'm trying to make. A single playthrough of Paratopic is quite short, as I said, something around an hour of raw playtime, and it doesn't offer all that much in terms of traditional pew-pew gameplay. The game features a stark, lo-fi, retro-inspired aesthetic that nails its uncanny, surrealistic atmosphere through thoughtful and consistent visual, narrative, sound, and music design. But Paratopic is one of those titles that has so much more going on than you can grasp during one playthrough. It's a story that you'll likely finish unsure what it even was that you just witnessed, but that sticks to your mind like a barnacle and keeps occupying your thoughts for long after you put it down. And although it feels quite linear, it's astounding how intricately its short interactive narrative is constructed. Every time you replay it, you will find an abundance of things you didn't notice before. At first glance, they might feel like random weirdness or unimportant fluff, but once you meet Paratopic on its own terms, you'll start realizing just how inexhaustibly deep the rabbit hole goes. If you want to get your own impression of Paratopic before I start clubbing its authors to death and overanalyzing it for longer than it takes to finish the actual game itself, and experience it yourself before my ramblings will forever bias what you see in its convoluted, otherworldly narrative, then by all means, stop this video here, get the game, and play through it once, or several times, however you like. It's available on itch.io and Steam, and it was just recently released on the Nintendo Switch as well, and at the time of release of this video, you can get it for around $5-ish US. And I'm certain that if any of what you've seen and heard about it in this video so far hadn't put you off and or piqued your interest, you won't regret that choice in the slightest. It's far more likely that Paratopic will sit with you for a good while. Now where do I even begin to unravel this? Paratopic comes along in such an innocuous, tiny frame, yet is spun more intricately than the world's largest ball of yarn. It's like an onion, man, and has layers. I could begin by recapitulating the story, or what the game decides to show of it. Over the course of its playtime, you assume the role of 3 playable characters for me, first-person POV. A man who's coerced into smuggling contraband VHS tapes across the none-further specified border, an assassin preparing to kill a key figure in the production and trade of said tapes, and a nature photographer stumbling across the remains of mysterious, abandoned, illicit industry deep in the forest. These story arcs are connected, most visibly through the game's central MacGuffin, the tapes, whose content we never get to witness directly, and the ominous shadow company behind the whole affair. But if I'm gonna be honest with you, the first time I played it, I hadn't even put together that I was playing 3 completely different people. That might be me being a little bit on the dense side, but that also tells you a lot about how much Paratopic loves to obfuscate its narrative. This has a lot to do with where the game places focus on and what it deliberately decides to omit. Many people would, at this point in time in gaming culture, intuitively describe Paratopic as a walking simulator. But looking at how this game tells its story, how skillfully it uses video game atypical stylistic devices, and how meticulously it employs common video game affordances, some of them implemented to perfection only to use them precisely once, to me, this game is far more of a statement on walking simulators. And at the same time, on the first-person game in general, how we as players consume them. In the very first minutes of the game, after a short bit of confusing dialogue, it quite literally places Chekhov's gun right in front of your nose. As you're sitting in a shabby diner that feels like a pixelated sister outlet of Winkies from Mulholland Drive, your first interaction as the assassin character, you pick up your revolver, grab each bullet individually, eject the cylinder of your gun, and insert each cartridge one by one. The game quite consciously doesn't give you any tutorial prompts, teaching you what button to press in order to reload your piece. Or, alright, it does so, but only if you don't figure it out on your own for quite a while. But I personally didn't need one, because I'm one of those many players who have been conditioned by the abundance of firearm-based action games I've played in the past. So without even thinking about it, I pushed the button I was drilled to reload guns with ever since games like Half-Life had standardized it. I pressed R, and as expected, a bullet slid into the chamber. This is very innocuous, and I didn't even register it at first, but it goes in line with a theme that permeates especially the assassin storyline. Paratopic heavily insinuates violence that is about to happen and that always hangs in the air. But this is not really something we bat an eye over in a first-person game, do we? It's common practice for first-person shooters to lead you straight into action and fulfill the promise of violence within the first minutes of the game. An appetizer for the bloodthirsty audience. Exceptions definitely prove the rule here, and that's fine. That's what you paid for, isn't it?
You're here because you wanted to feel like something you're not. A hero.
So expecting shit to go down when you approach Paratopic without knowing anything about it beforehand, this is exactly the expectation the game sets up. But instead of satisfying it, you get striking mundanity. Paratopic starts on a typical pacing curve suited for a high-intensity thriller. 4 short scenes gradually build up the expectation for immediate action, the smuggler and the assassin getting briefed on their jobs in a diner, the game puts a gun right in front of you and makes you load it in preparation, and then you carefully approach the target, loaded pistol in hand, ready to strike. The pacing curve exponentially approaches its peak. And when you breach the door, ready to unleash hell, Paratopic steps on the brakes, full stop, flatlining the curve from one moment to the next, knowingly denying the audience the payoff it's so meticulously set up. Instead, all of a sudden, you're in a small, shabby apartment house lobby. A cigarette butt smolders in an ashtray. You look around and call the elevator. And wait for it. You wait. And wait. The analog display needle creeps along agonizingly slow, indicating the cabin's languid descent. This could almost be described as boredom. When the elevator arrives, the door opens and you step in, the game jarringly jump cuts you up to the apartment floor. It almost feels like being teleported out of nowhere. A woman talks to you in the smoke-laden hallway, says some men were in your apartment earlier. So, from previous conversations, that means you're playing as the smuggler, right now? The game never outright tells you whose shoes you occupy at the moment and revels in obfuscating the necessary context more often than not. After a brief talk, you step into your messy, closet-sized apartment and find the suitcase your contacts have left for you. Inside, the portentous video cassettes. Your neighbor butts in unannounced and nosily asks you to give her one of the tapes. It's completely up to you if you indulge her. If you do give in, you'll find her sitting in her apartment, staring obsessively into the tube, consuming the contents of the tape in rapture and... A large part of the rest of the game is, contrary to previous expectation, surprisingly mundane. The smuggling job turns out not to be some sort of gameplay challenge where you have to meticulously plan and execute your routes across the border, no high-octane evasions of border comps, nor hot pursuit car chases or something. You just drive. You drive along the empty highway, the suitcase full of tapes riding shotgun. Your only go-to stimulus is either listening to music, talk shows, or just keep the radio off and let your mind wander aimlessly without any of the manifold distractions we're being bombarded with in our daily lives. Wait, why is there a gun in my passenger seat now? I could swear there was a suitcase with the tapes there just a second ago, or was that during an earlier drive segment? I thought I was playing the smuggler during the car segments. Am I the assassin? Ooh, what the... Time spent between two places of interest, traversing liminal space. Little chit-chat with a gas station clerk, talking about energy drinks with lots of berries, the moral hubris of rich people claiming superiority over everybody else, and that famous waffle place that burned down. Man, they really had good waffles. Things ain't how they used to be. Did the fucking snack machine just eat my dollar? Piece of shit. You're a bird watcher with a camera, following an elusive red bird that simply won't hold still for the perfect picture. It leads you deeper and deeper into the hinterlands, where you find trees mysteriously cut off. It's like some sort of Tunguska incident has occurred here sometime in recent years. Still driving. Tattered remnants of old decaying industry, abandoned refineries, decommissioned pipelines, ruins that lament a once prosperous era of economic hubris long gone. Armchair philosophy about the moral superiority of aliens, the greatest shitty tourist traps of the area, and of course, the collapse and decay of the region a bit over a decade ago. Wait, is there someone standing next to my car? Hiking further into the woods, still tailing the red bird. Remnants of long decommissioned industry. Cargo containers, abandoned. Why are there surveillance cameras here? Are they still active? Wait, I've seen this symbol before. Until this point, far over half of the game's playtime we spend with things that are strikingly uneventful, especially for a game where you play as a smuggler and an assassin. There's a constant tension hanging in the air, carried by this uneasy certainty that something's off. It's almost like the game gaslights you into constantly feeling observed, stalked, as if some eldritch force is watching your every move, but you have no idea why, or oftentimes even who, and when you are. And at the same time, you're lulled into an uneasy sense of safety through the conscious use of gameplay conventions. The game knowingly plays with game feel to pull that off. Paratopic is the type of game that a certain type of gamer would dismissively dub as not a real game, which is usually an accolade that the devs are doing some great stuff if you ask me. The way its narrative is structured up until this point knowingly establishes it as a walking simulator, a seemingly linear story progression without the traditional gameplay challenges offered in most other video games in the same technical framework, i.e. first-person shooters. Paratopic does this to, just like in the beginning, set up expectations in order to subvert them. Just like the opening established the expectation of active violence, then tore it away, at this point, when players have been firmly rooted in walking simulator gameplay over multiple scenes of observation-focused, low-intensity gameplay, it pulls the rug from under the player's feet once more. The game eventually cuts straight back to when the assassin is about to breach the back room of the diner. Zero build-up this time, gun in hand, and... When I encountered this scene for the first time, similar to how I intuitively pressed R to load the revolver in the opening segment, I felt almost startled by how reflexively I'd snapped right into killer mode and how I went straight for an execution-style headshot. How I, as someone with years of ingrained shooter experience, didn't even think nor hesitate for a split second, but like a trained attack dog went straight for the artery. Look at the mess I made. This guy, a video technician or something like that, is apparently doing some kind of work related to those ominous VHS tapes, probably deeply immersed in what he was doing, unarmed and not expecting a thing. From one instant to the next, he got his brain sprayed all across the room. I did this.
This is my design.
Paratopic makes a point in how fast everything is over, how anticlimactic this murder scene that was built up from the very beginning feels. A literal heartbeat and it's done. But instead of flexing over the instant gratification of virtual murder, the game almost obsesses over the consequences. You pick up a tape from the pile, one of the red ones, the juicy ones. When you shove it in the VCR, you relive the scene once more. Not the thrill of the build-up, not the endorphin rush of the climactic instant of pulling the trigger, not the loud, succulent bang of your magnum. It cuts straight to the result of your actions. A clumsily muffled, cut-off acoustic residue of the gunshot, lifeless body sagging awkwardly to the floor, the guy's brain spraying across the room once again. It's like your nose being shoved into the doo-doo you just made on the carpet. Look at it! I find this scene fascinating for many reasons. I found several people talking about this game describe the scene in particular as excessively violent.
The birdwatcher can, well, take pictures of birds, and the assassin can make one of the gnarliest headshots since the movie Brick.
The thing is, I felt very similarly about it, but the more I thought about it, if we take the scene at face value, yes, this is quite bloody and gory, but if you hold it right next to the stuff we're being exposed to in so many violent by default action games out there, the scene might actually be considered somewhat tame in comparison. And yeah, not all of these scenes I've shown you are actual headshots, but the point is that this scene here in Paratopic is made to be visceral and shocking no matter where you place your shot. Through the way the game continuously played and toyed with the expectation of the player, with how Paratopic stalled this moment for nearly 80% of its playtime, non-violent playtime, until it finally delivered this sudden peak ultra-violence. The jarring contrast makes it stand out as something that feels so much more visceral and gnarly than it actually is. In a Call of Duty, you kill hundreds if not thousands of people over the course of a mere couple of hours, and you won't even bat an eyelash, no matter how much calculated controversy they conjure up with each time. In Paratopic, you fire one shot, take one life, and it sticks with you. This deliberate setup of a non-violent audience expectation over a huge part of the playtime, only to contrast it with sudden peak ultra-violence, is a trope that I've noticed before. Not so much in video games though, but in movies. There are a handful of films I've noticed that have used this to great effect. Little to no violence over a long stretch of time, no appetizers to acclimatize the audience, only insinuation at max, and then amping it up in one instant to a sudden display of intensely graphic brutality. It gives violence as a stylistic device, purpose, and weight, making it feel genuinely shocking and traumatizing. Because one thing that I'd noticed about Paratopic is that when I was thinking about it, when writing about it, when overanalyzing it, I tended to far more often compare it to films rather than to other video games. It is an interactive, dynamic story that can only be told like this in video game form, yet much of its narrative language and many of the most notable stylistic devices it uses makes me immediately think of renowned film directors rather than video game contemporaries. Aside from the use of the aforementioned sudden peak ultra-violence trope, one of the most striking examples is probably the way Paratopic employs jump cuts. It's not that other games don't use jump cuts, but especially first-person games have the tendency to either bridge different scenes, sometimes out of technical necessity, with more or less clever loading screens, or use various different types of more gamey, seamless, or smart transitions to ease the narrative from scene to scene. But Paratopic goes a completely different route by using these strikingly jarring jump cuts that so abruptly tear you from one moment to the next without any transition, loading screen build-up, or any other contextual help that you'll always need a moment to even orient yourself right after it, to grasp what the hell is even happening. One moment you're steering your car along the highway, and one split second later you're standing in a gas station. It's like someone snapping a finger in front of your face to wake you up from spacing out. This is eerily similar to how living with ADHD can feel like at times. Just saying. How did I get here? This storytelling style creates the feeling that the scenes of striking mundanity we experience in Paratopic are the characters' moments between their actual conscious awareness. What we're doing feels like the unimportant stuff that the brain decides to flush out of the short-term memory. Waiting for an elevator. Snippets of unimportant chit-chat that our minds compartmentalize. Long stretches of more or less eventless walking. And a lot of driving.
Oh, welcome back also. Get on stage.
The voice acting in Paratopic sounds like gibberish, but it's not complete nonsense. If you listen closely, you can hear that it has the phonetic silhouette of actual spoken English.
Well, listen, we call the phone, our listener, we'll call it yeah, no, it's different.
But it's shapeless. It sounds like a conversation that you don't actually pay attention to. People talking on the radio while you're spacing out during the drive. All of these things give Paratopic I wouldn't exactly call it dreamlike, but a liminal quality. As if you're dropped in someone else's distorted, incomplete comprehension of their journey through the liminal spaces between the moments of wakeful clarity. I've often seen this game described as Lynchian, so resembling the surreal, fever dream-like atmosphere of David Lynch movies. Aside from the more obvious beats, the diner that feels like a PS1 adaptation of Winkies, or the looming backdrop of suffocating industrial decay that could be straight out of Eraserhead, the comparisons are mostly drawn for the game's noticeably cinematic feel that evokes similar emotions and feelings of disorientation and confusion as the works of directors like David Lynch, messing with the audience's concepts of strange and familiar, dreamlike and surreal, while at the same time grounded in comfort and mundanity. Lynch has a tendency to focus more on how a scene feels over spelling out what really happens for narrative cohesion. I've been a fan of David Lynch's work for most of my life, and yet, as much as I see the parallels, I felt that using the attribute Lynchian to describe Paratopic's unique rhythm, pacing, atmosphere, and narrative texture does the game a great disservice. It gives off the vibe that it's merely a wannabe Lynch imposter game, when it is so much more. Because despite being woven from a similar cloth, Paratopic establishes its own unique narrative style and presentation that effortlessly stands on its own 2 feet. If you want to play the compare game, you can easily see similarities to many other works of revered idiosyncratic auteur-type filmmakers. For instance, I felt a similarly strong resemblance to the brooding, minimalist works of Jim Jarmusch when it comes to how Paratopic delivers its story, eschewing traditional narrative structure, lacking clear story progression, and focusing heavily on mood and character development. An assassin as one of the pivotal characters is already peak Jarmusch, but instead of turning it into an action romp that focuses on the glorified, borderline pornographic mise-en-scène of the murdering, Jarmusch's character portraits are, just like Paratopic, almost obsessed with everything but the immediate action, the moments of peak intensity. And that's not just for assassins. Jarmusch has a penchant to deviate focus on the mundane, the common, everyday things we often don't pay much attention to. The impressions our short-term memory usually flushes into the aether. Jarmusch frames them in a way that emphasizes their unique beauty. And Paratopic has a similar obsession with the things other films and games don't pay attention to when telling a story. I've heard people criticize the game for featuring 3 multiple-minute-long segments exclusively having the player ride along the highway with no traditional gameplay challenges. Just driving. Which, in light of the short length of the game, accounts to probably 10% or even more of the whole playtime. But these segments have a profound point in the narrative of the game. Paratopic, as its title already suggests, portrays the mundane, the boring, the liminal space between the moments of peak intensity and focus. Yeah, all of this made me think of Jarmusch's films when playing Paratopic for the first time, but it's also very different at the same time. you can equally find nods to Cronenberg for sure. Kubrick? Damn, just listen to this. Tarkovsky? Oh boy, yes. Paratopic is literally a short story about the concept of the zone. We'll get to that. It is because this game is incredibly strong and consistent in its theming. Every nut and bolt means something, or rather, the whole setting is built so consistently that it feels like everything is there for a reason. You're never gonna know, and you don't have to. And Paratopic, unlike all the filmmaker comparisons we've drawn, conjures its unique atmosphere in an interactive medium. It references and expresses a deep fondness for the art it draws inspiration from, but never outright imitates. To go full circle, perhaps the strongest parallel I can draw to Lynch is that Paratopic is a game that, the more I replay it in order to finally make sense of the things that I don't yet fully grasp, the more uncertain I end up being about it. With each iteration, it feels like I'm getting less sure of what it actually means or wants to say. I distinctly remember when I watched Mulholland Drive for the first time with a friend, we discussed it for over an hour afterwards. We tried to make sense of its confusing, labyrinthine plot and ended up so perplexed that we decided to watch it a second time right away. And, well, we just ended up being even more flabbergasted. Felt like we understood even less and had even more unanswered questions lingering than after the first viewing. It was, I admit, a rather frustrating experience at the time. The reason for that is that our minds were rigid, hyper-focused on finding the one true explanation, and that either didn't really exist, or it was just never meant to be deciphered unambiguously to begin with. It's much better if you just vibe with it and don't try to make sense of everything. It's a mood. Paratopic works exactly like that. If you want to tear its story apart with a crowbar and make sense of everything seamlessly, you end up with the pieces scattered all over. In order to enjoy it, you have to meet it on its own terms and find your own meaning.
Потому что слабость велика, а сила ничтожна. Когда дерево растет, оно нежно и гибко, а когда оно сухо и жестко, оно умирает. Черствость и сила – спутники смерти. Гибкость и слабость выражают свежесть бытия.
In recent years, I've developed a strange relationship with retro aesthetics in media, because it's become almost unavoidable ever since the rise of synthwave. Back in the days of Drive and Hotline Miami, striking retro visuals and acoustics in a game evoked an immediate holy shit wow effect, so much so that it has grown into its own recognized subgenre. Media that makes use of nostalgia as a vector for emotional response in the audience still, more often than not, achieves this initial rapture effect with me. This immediate sensation of longing for an undefined past through a more or less specific combination of omitted fidelity and style, appealing to a vague, hazy recollection of the good old days. There are some cases, though, where a game does more than just superficially wow the audience with retro aesthetics, and that's when their use is more than just a convenient paint-over tool, but an essential part of its message. Paratopic is a perfect example for this, because not only does it vaguely resemble a PSX-style early 3D game era aesthetic with its unfiltered pixelated textures, reduced color palette, and highly stylized low-poly models, its aesthetics also strongly underline its themes. The omission of fidelity in this game works hand in hand with its meta-narrative. Crystal clear high-resolution rendering and millions and billions of polygons would actually work directly against what it has to say.
It's got better resolution than the real world.
There is the most obvious example, the game's central MacGuffin, the VHS tapes.
It's tea.
Heavily desired contraband data containers of unknown content that play a pivotal role in each character's story arc. They're an artifact that evokes feelings of nostalgia in the audience, but also the subject of everyone's obsession, capable of corrupting a person's very essence from the inside out. The VHS tape is a medium that we associate with a very specific type of aesthetic and time. Once the most widespread analog video storage format, people who have lived through the age of the video home system cassette are intuitively familiar with its distinctive profile of low fidelity and distortion. And despite these attributes being objective shortcomings of the medium, it haunts our perception of media from beyond the grave, since we've grown to associate its distinct aesthetic footprint as nostalgic.
We are like the dreamer who dreams. But who is the dreamer?
And it's satisfyingly full circle that the retro aesthetic in Paratopic is precisely used to portray liminality, the impressions and experiences from the moments that our brains routinely flush into the void because they're not pertinent.
How do you log that non-pertinent? No drug talk?
The way nostalgia functions is identical to how we choose to remember or not remember things. It's no coincidence that we spend so much time in this game in a car. 3 of the 17 scenes you play through are pretty much eventless driving along an empty highway. You initially assume that you're playing as the smuggler with the suitcase on the passenger's seat, but when you look away for a while, the object miraculously switches into the gun, or an empty seat. The time spent on roads and roadside stops is a liminal space that each of the characters share with each other, and that each of the characters traverse with the same attention to detail, virtually none. So in a sense, their patchy recollection of their time spent on the road is virtually identical, and so it doesn't matter who we are in each of the scenes. When you recall a scene from your childhood, your mind reconstructs a fragmented, distorted, and, most importantly, incomplete version of the quote-unquote real moment from your past, and it fills in the blanks with whatever it has available. Noise, emptiness, fragments of other memories, and newer, more frequently computed thought patterns to assemble a picture that feels complete. It's strikingly low fidelity, but to our very own internal language and thought frequency, it feels complete enough that we don't question its validity. Like an old cassette laden with magnetic noise, distortion, and other digital pollution artifacts accumulated over years of attrition. And isn't that precisely why this fuzzy, idolized past keeps haunting us, induced by the deliberate use of low-fidelity audio-visual effects? We're making things look bad on purpose because it makes us feel something. Retro games imitate the real technical limitations of the time, made on modern engines for modern computers, designed to emulate the feeling those relics from our past evoked in us.
What I am about to do has not been approved by the Vatican.
The collective unconscious of a generation has been cultivated by the media we consumed. It shaped us and influenced and altered our perceptions, forever conditioning our thoughts and emotional responses. I don't have to have grown up in a rural US middle-class neighborhood in the 80s in order for Stranger Things to make me feel like it's a depiction of my childhood as well, in some form. We've been conditioned to feel nostalgic for fabricated memories that aren't our own.
Those aren't your memories, they're somebody else's. Okay. Bad joke. I made a bad joke. You're not a replicant. Go home. Okay?
And And isn't this theme of whitewashing one's memories through the soft focus lens of nostalgia perfectly in line with the game's setting? Paratopic's architectural backdrop is painted with the greys, browns, and rust reds that embody the post-industrial sacrifice zones of huge swaths of a forgotten America that's been left to rot during the past decades of economic recession. It's a refreshingly unspent setting for a video game. Melancholy Rust Belt blues. Paratopic's all-but-in-name I-94 leads us past the deindustrialized ruins of a once thriving, hubristic economy that was abandoned for cheaper alternatives in more profitably exploitable regions across the globe. Hollowed-out factories, decommissioned refineries, broken-down pipelines, and sheer, never-ending scenery drawn from a canvas of structural vulnerability are the very essence of the idea of the zone. Huge areas of dilapidation are the silent witnesses to the sophomoric prosperity of days gone. It's a dark mirror held up to the people struggling through economic despair today, reminding us just how much better previous generations had it. Generations whose sense of altruism withered by the excess of yesteryear, who had theirs and who now look down on us with unsympathetic contempt for not achieving the same with the significantly inferior hand we've been dealt. It was a completely different playing field back in the boomer days, wasn't it? Far more stacked in the common man's favor to a degree that's highly unlikely to ever return. And to be clear, this is not just due to mere whims of fate, but the result of cold and calculated political decisions made during the Reagan-Thatcher era of deregulation mania. It's those policies and the frenzy of outsourcing labor to foreign countries that foreseeably transformed the booming Midwest into an economic and architectural rust bowl. As far west as Milwaukee and as far east as Buffalo, the zone stretches across the map like geographic eczema. Yet at the same time, while unemployment, homelessness, and an irredeemable lack of perspective and opportunity is the fabric of those forgotten zones, not just exclusive to the US, gleefully reflected back at those who didn't or couldn't abandon the sinking ship in the decades of continuous economic collapse, those proverbial chalk outlines on the pavement have accrued their own peculiar flavor of nostalgia. The rough and gritty charm of post-industrial urban regions has, over time, evolved into a banner of romanticized cultural identity. It's a dichotomy, the bittersweet reminiscence of the golden days, a dollop of denial of economic realities, and a seething resentment of the decaying architectural residue our ancestors have left us with, turned into an object of idolized cultural pride. Just like videocassettes preserve filtered and heavily distorted information that, when reflected back at us, evoke thoughts, memories, and emotions, those dilapidated wastelands tell a distorted and abridged tale of bygone times. The scenery is the medium, nostalgia the playback device. Paratopic's world is everything but inviting. It's a decayed, abandoned husk where just looking at things makes you feel sickly. And yet, it emits an uncanny allure. The fascinating ambiguity that makes the idea of the zone so tantalizing. A place that radiates hopelessness, apathy, and soul-crushing despair, yet you feel strangely drawn to it at the same time. The progenitor of the concept of the zone is the 1972 Strugatsky novel Roadside Picnic, which revolved around areas across the globe where inexplicable phenomena and bizarre anomalies that defy our understanding of nature and science occur in the aftermath of a cataclysmic event known as the Visitation. Scientists and thinkers worldwide compete to come up with the most sound explanation for the paranormal nature of these zones. One of the leading hypotheses is that a highly advanced intergalactic spacefaring civilization simply used our planet to discard waste material during their trek across the galaxy. We were, for them, nothing but a convenient litter bin to discard byproducts of a technology light years ahead of human comprehension. Like junk that was mindlessly tossed by a group of hikers during a roadside picnic, with humans being like little insects stumbling over it, but completely lacking the means and intelligence to even remotely comprehend what they're finding. Andrei Tarkovsky adapted the book 7 years later into his seminal movie Stalker, which is a somewhat liberal interpretation of the source material. For one, in that it is much more vague about the nature and the origin of the zone that the three deuteragonists of the film venture into with the goal of fulfilling their innermost desires. Especially the film, with its long, brooding, and melancholic shots of a post-civilization landscape reclaimed by the forces of nature, was, in hindsight, often considered to have been uncannily prescient, since many people felt that it predicted the scenario of the forsaken zone around Chernobyl's reactor after the nuclear disaster in the Ukraine in 1986. A living example of a region of true post-apocalypse right here on Earth, brought about by the collapse of human ingenuity. It is hard to look at shots and footage from the zone around the reactor even today and not think about Stalker's haunting imagery. But the question should really not be, how could they predict Chernobyl? Because all it needed was a keen-eyed look at the world in its current state. The superpowers of the world had been continuously racing for global dominance on every front, colonizing, exploiting, and depleting every available resource with complete indifference towards the obvious and often admonished long-term consequences. A cancerous expansion mania devoured the world in pursuit of power and supremacy over the opponent, fueled by a hubristic faith in the infallibility of human ingenuity and scientific rationality. Scientism became the dominant denomination of the post-war era. If we produce the smartest minds, uncover all the right data, get all the right equations in place, and plug all the right values in our spreadsheets, we can achieve everything, become anything, conquer the world and the stars, and nothing will stand in our way. In 1979, it was only a matter of time until a Chernobyl would emerge for real somewhere in the world for everyone to behold. Led by delusions of grandeur, the powers that be continuously tapped into ever greater forces, so fickle, so fundamentally untamable, that it's a borderline miracle the world is still in one piece even today. Because everyone would rather see the world in ruins than see the other win. The emergence of such zones of post-civilization was an entirely predictable foresight. And this lust to subjugate the world had infected everyone. It was not tied to either Soviet-style socialism or Western-style capitalist expansionism. Paratopic takes place in exactly such a zone, a ruin of post-industrialist hubris, one where things beyond our understanding can happen at any moment, equally spawned by the byproducts of a truly indifferent faction as depicted in Roadside Picnic. But unlike in the Strugatsky novel, this zone hasn't drawn worldwide attention to itself. Paratopic Zone is forgotten and abandoned, every aspect of it purposefully discarded in plain sight, including the people who still inhabit it. Not by some extraterrestrial colonizing force as local folklore insinuates, but by the exact powers that initially erected the industrial hulks that are now rotting and decaying on the roadsides, the once sprawling cities that now fall apart because their value for expansionism has long desiccated. No, it was done by the unquenchable greed of a very terrestrial colonizing force. It has infected and corroded the land, and like ambulant dandelions, no matter how many heads you chop off, the roots are still underground, waiting to spring up again. But this is about more than just the corporate greed of industrial capitalism, indifferently discarding a hollowed-out husk to rot. The The zone portrayed in Paratopic is, in many ways, a depiction of the Western imperialist flip side of Soviet-era wastelands foretold in Roadside Picnic and Stalker. This game takes place in one of the many zones that really, truly exist today in our world. And in this game, you unveil a tiny sliver of it by burrowing into the dreamlike, liminal, and half-lucid minds of our clueless cadre of contemporary witnesses. This is where the unexplained, the things that defy our understanding of science and rationalism, the paranormal, takes place. Down in the subconscious, the moments between the wakeful clarity where all our biases and preconceptions thwart us from seeing things how they really are. In many ways, these areas of post-expansionism are our postmodern equivalent to the magic realms of old legends, places where logic is not the end-all be-all, and where magic is still very much a reality. They're not unclaimed by man, but rather reclaimed by nature, a byproduct of this scientistic megalomania of our ancestors, the proverbial sins of the fathers, mindlessly discarded like litter during a picnic on the side of the road. The zone is a place where the tranquilizing, scientific oversaturation of our modern civilization has been shattered back into its atoms, put in its place by ancient, unconquered earth forces far beyond our comprehension. A place where man is still humble. The perpetually shape-shifting, ephemeral nature of the zone equates to decayed industrial wastelands and places that nature has reclaimed in its divine mercilessness. This brutal contrast between creation and entropy these places embody emits an aura that is in itself phantomic and removed from the man-made, Icarian reality of the glorious past. Because even though these zone-ish landscapes are irreparably destroyed, they nevertheless retain a tantalizing kind of mystery that appeals precisely because of their inscrutability. It feels like anything, good or bad, could be waiting for you once you scratch the surface. A place where the magical, the supernatural, and the weird are untouched by the gravity of our logic-driven, rational civilization. And that is ultimately why everyone is so maniacally obsessed with those tapes, and why they're highly controlled contraband in the world of Paratopic, because they provide a tiny glimpse into a forgotten reality that's unhinged from the bias of our hard and rigid, hyper-normalized civilization. It is a primordial yearning for mystery and fulfillment that's rooted deep within the human heart. The very reason we're so enchanted by the surreal magic of scan lines and magnetic aberrations of a VHS cassette. Hey, wow, this sure was a journey, wasn't it? I mean, yeah, that's why I called it a journey through Paratopic. It makes sense. One thing that makes this sub-series of videos so special to me is they really take me, the creator, on a journey as well while writing them. I've done this for 2 games before, The Void and Rule of Rose, and the special rule about my approach with them is that I write each chapter individually, or sometimes 1 or 2 chapters, and edit them before I move on to the next one. So while I may have a rough idea, I don't really know where it's going and where I'll end up with the final chapter when I'm working on the first ones. It makes for a very different tone and feel and direction, not just in that they tend to get quite long, obviously, but also that I end up talking more about a game than talk over it. Like how I would sit down with a friend and talk about a game and we'd end up in places we have no idea when we start the conversation. Taking a game as a jumping off point, but just letting the current carry me wherever it takes me. I'm very fond of this process, and I personally always end up enjoying these journey through videos a lot once I'm finished with them, but they also feel so strange and vastly different than most of the things I make that I'm always quite nervous when it comes to releasing one of them. So in that sense, thank you so much for watching an entire hour of this meditation on Paratopic that for some reason ended up once again in an ad hoc dissection of Stalker. It's kind of becoming a thing now, I feel. I'd really love to do this format more often, given the interest is there, and I've got one lined up that I'm already working on. which is a game that I've been meaning to cover for a very long time because it's utterly brilliant, and that's, while we're at it, also very much a contender for the Zone narratives in video games, the Polish indie horror masterpiece Darkwood. I don't yet know if it'll be the next video or sometime after that, because the journey through writing process is lengthy and takes a lot of time, so you'll just have to stay tuned for now. Now, a few videos ago I shared with you guys a little bit of an overview where the channel is currently standing at the moment, what goals I'm working towards. Why I had at the time, for instance, decided to take on sponsorships, which you can see is certainly not a guaranteed recurring thing. This video didn't have a sponsor and the last one didn't. Not that there aren't any offers, there's always plenty, but getting brands that I'm actually comfortable with and willing to endorse with a good conscience is a whole other thing. I really don't want to abuse the trust of my audience in this regard. The point is, sponsorships helped, especially when it comes to being able to properly pay the people I work with when making these videos. I wouldn't feel nearly as good about the final result of this video, for instance, if it weren't for the great work of my copy editor Matt, who spent a lot of time polishing the shit that I came up with. As it stands at this point, the crowdfunding support on Patreon is the main and most important financial foundation of this channel. Sponsorships are rather unreliable and more to be considered a bonus when it works out, but nothing I'd build a house on. And YouTube's ad revenue, well, Jesus, you probably noticed how in the recent year you get constantly bombarded with double ads all the time, how the ad density on YouTube is drastically increased. One might think that this would mean that creators also get vastly better paid, but of course that hasn't happened in the slightest. The ads have quadrupled, yet the creators' cuts have not seen a significant increase at all. Anyway, I'm digressing. My point is, Patreon is still and will remain de facto the most important source of income for this channel, and also for me to pay rent and food and software and electricity and all, the foundation. We've recently reached a very important milestone, which is absolutely wonderful. I'm really thankful for everyone's support, and currently I'm aiming to reach probably the most important milestone, where it would enable me to work far more together with other people, which is exactly the one path I'd want to take in order to produce more content on this channel without sacrificing any quality. Actually, probably even quite the opposite. We're nearly 70% there, so if you want to join and help out as well, and in general support the stability of my work with this channel, then please hop over to Patreon and pitch in as well. It's very much appreciated in these unstable times. And for this video, I'd like to give out a special thank you to these top tier supporters: Billy Lott, Cordelia Crescendo, Swallowtail Knights, Evan Tekre, Joey Monster, Wobbles and Bean the Wonder Ducks, Catherine Escobar, Christine, 9ball9606, Laird Wakala, Agustin Ortega, Christian, Sophie Paulson, Ronan Crom, aka Daniel242172, Shannon Blue, Matt Gretton, Space Admiral Vivi, Starina Abramson, Alex Popov, Kantan Prodom, Isabella Stoner, Ty McCandless, Jordan, Chuck Taylor, Sophia Ong, Refkins, Casper Ram, Faulty Gear, Kenan Ward, Max Macula, Dr. Haley Isabella Colley, Hunter Crawford and Margaret Strawn, David Zelenak, Chris C., Andrew Hines, Nikon the Brave, Puka Princess, Lawrence E. Buben, Kevin H. Yang, Norbert Gerard Matinka, Jin Hansen, Raul Blanco, Pablo Arcelas, Dana Rosa, Thwagam, Giselle Almonte, Mauricio Reyna, Malim, and Terry Collins. Until next time, ta-ta!